Before you watch this episode of our cityCURRENT radio show, I want to invite you to join cityCURRENT's e-learning and online personal development platform called GrowthCurrent. I'm Jeremy Park, host of the cityCURRENT radio show and CEO of cityCURRENT. GrowthCurrent is your exclusive ticket to attend virtual events with global thought leaders, national guest speakers, and experts who can help you grow personally and professionally. It gives you access to success secrets, lessons learned, learning modules, and so much more. Being online, you can join us from anywhere in the world. Subscriptions are only $8 a month, or you can do bulk subscriptions for your team. Check out growthcurrent.com to learn more and to join us in our efforts to power the good. And now, on to the show. Welcome back to the cityCURRENT radio show. I'm your host, Jeremy Park. We're honored to be joined by our next guest, Gabrielle Thompson. She is the executive director and the CEO of Free for Life. And so, Gabrielle, how are you doing?
Doing well. Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
So this is an extremely important topic in terms of what we're going to be discussing and the work that you do. Human trafficking is something that unfortunately around the world is a huge issue, and obviously here in the States too. Give us a little bit of your background and backstory leading into this, and then we'll dive into your efforts.
Perfect. Well, really for me personally, since the time that I was a little girl, I knew that I wanted to work in some capacity internationally, working towards empowering women, whether that be through literacy or through microloans, and then through a series of events. Amazingly, I got brought to the human trafficking space, which really to me kind of combines all of the biggest issues that women and children are facing into one major atrocity, being human trafficking.
Talk about what you see globally and then kind of locally or nationally in terms of statistics and just how big of a deal this is.
Thank you for asking that. I mean, I think kind of the first thing to say within that is human trafficking is much bigger than anyone really expects when they look at it. And the data is really challenging because it is a criminal enterprise. A lot of it is underground, but from the data that we really lean on, there are an expected 40 million people being enslaved around the world. And that includes, of course, sex trafficking as well as labor trafficking and other types. So it's truly one of the biggest issues in our world today.
I know that one of the things, and we've kind of dived into this topic pretty heavily on our end, which is extremely interesting in the sense of how do you shut down the business model? How do you, especially globally, and create not only the constraints, but obviously the legal fight against it, which is a whole nother issue. Share, dive in on your end in terms of the efforts and the programs. Let's go ahead and start unpacking it, and then we'll kind of work our way through some of those.
That's great. Yeah. So to kind of start off a little bit about Free for Life International. So there are a lot of anti-trafficking organizations around the world. And so for us, when we develop our programs, it's really important that we develop them based on need within the anti-trafficking space on a global level, as well as what are the gaps within the anti-trafficking community that are not being filled by other organizations. So really, Free for Life International is very unique in those aspects. So we do a multi-faceted approach to fighting trafficking. So the first way that we do that is through prevention. We believe the only way to really decrease and, of course, hopefully eradicate human trafficking is through prevention, specifically with those that are the most at risk. So we do a prevention approach working specifically with foster care, orphan children, etc. And then we also believe, of course, in interception and pulling people out of trafficking. So we have a rescue operation. That rescue operation has been able to rescue over 1,400 women and girls, which we are so proud of. And it's very ethical. So it's done through an approach called border monitoring, where we monitor the flows of people being trafficked between the Nepal and India border, which is incredible. And then our next approach that we have is restoration, which is, anyone that understands the trafficking journey understands that without that piece of restoration, it's very, very hard hard for survivors. They need that long-term care. And so we're able to provide that through a safe home that we have in Thailand that has no time limit for survivors. And in fact, the longest woman that's been living there arrived at 10 years old, and she's now 21 and finishing her degree. So it's really incredible to see the healing process that can happen. And then our last program that we have is a scholarship program, which is kind of on the back end of trafficking, which is the ability to empower survivors after they've had some healing time to really be able to pursue their dreams. So those are kind of our 4 core programs. And of course, included in that is outreach and awareness, which is crucial for any anti-trafficking organization.
Absolutely. Talk about what it means to be based when you talk about like Tennessee and yet globally fighting. Talk about kind of that relationship of building the relationships and fundraising and everything here locally, and yet really looking external and saying, hey, this is a global issue. We've got to be able to kind of pull all these pieces together with a local slant here.
We definitely do have local participation. So really for us, we're one of the leaders in our awareness and outreach within Middle Tennessee. So we do sector specific training. So for example, we've worked with the healthcare sector, the trucking industry, even rideshare services like Uber and Lyft. So we do kind of very specific ways to train. But really for me, the way that nonprofits, especially when they're focusing on the same type of issue, can make the biggest difference is through that collective impact. And so that's something we're really proud of. In the state of Tennessee, we are currently #1 in the nation for fighting human trafficking. And that comes through having local partners of other organizations. So we all work collectively and collaboratively to address trafficking within the Middle Tennessee area. But within that, it's so important to, of course, be able to raise funds and have support from people in the local spaces. I mean, without generosity, we're not able to do our work. But really for us, we are interested, of course, very much in the local, very much within Tennessee and the United States, but also are passionate about addressing trafficking for those that often tend to be forgotten when you look at where organizations are set up around the globe.
Yeah. Share some tips and best practices when it comes to the training you do. And as you mentioned, it's rideshare, it's the trucking companies in terms of what to look for, what signs, how you combat it. So what are some of your just kind of top best practices or tips that we all need to be paying attention to in terms of our help to fight human trafficking?
Well, first, I would say that it's very important at all when potentially encountering someone that's being trafficked, that someone has a trauma-informed lens. So within that, having empathy and compassion, understanding, but also not necessarily getting deeply involved within their situation. So it's really important, if you do identify anyone that's being trafficked, to contact your local hotline or the national hotline. And within that, kind of some basics, because within every different sector, there's different things to identify. So for example, in the healthcare sector, those are very specific to the healthcare sector. But in general, for any of you that are listening that are concerned citizens and want to look for something, things that are definitely red flags are going to be individuals that look like they may be afraid. They may be withdrawn in certain ways. If you happen to have a conversation with someone, they are not sure where they are. They are not making a lot of sense when you ask them, what do you do for a living? Where do you live? Because sometimes a trafficking victim doesn't know which state they're in because they're being transported. So a lot of information that doesn't make a lot of sense. Also, we tend to see individuals that are being trafficked. I mean, oftentimes a pimp or a trafficker is around them. So if someone looks like they keep looking behind them, they look like they're being watched, they look like they're being observed, those things are really important. Also, in the sense of, let's say someone is an Uber driver or working at a bar or encountering someone, we've seen this at, for example, cell phone shops, burner phones are very common. But really, if there is someone with them, controlling what they say, controlling their movements, silencing them, not allowing them to speak, those would be signs that I would recommend kind of on the overall scale.
Talk about advocacy. One of the things that I've always been really interested in this space is how you almost have to train all the different sides of the detectives, the police, the law, like they all have to be working in, you mentioned collaboration, but there has to be a collaboration, and then tightening up and learning how to, bring the cases and then bring down the hammer on them. And that's not just in the States, that's globally as well, and trying to share some of those best practices so that the legal side can really hit them hard. So talk about on your end, kind of the advocacy in either, something good that's happened or kind of where you see some more changes needed. Talk about kind of that side.
Well, first I want to mention it's really tricky when it comes to legally, because every state has different laws when it comes to trafficking. And so, for example, one thing that I would recommend that I think every single state in the nation needs to have is a victim-centered approach. And what that means is someone that is over the age of 18 that is, let's say, found for prostitution, they are given the right to claim force, fraud, or coercion and not arrested for prostitution, for example, because oftentimes those women come from a trafficking background and they're still being trafficked. And so really taking that approach, the other thing as well is for minors that are being trafficked, they do not, in the state of Tennessee, they do not have to testify to prove force, fraud, or coercion in front of their perpetrator. So that is really important. So really, I very much think that legally, if there was more of a victim-centered approach, and really globally, that would be really important. An example from our journey with Free for Life International that we've experienced, because we work internationally, there was a trafficker that we were tracking for several years. And we had him, and these were officers in Nepal trying to find him. Well, basically he crossed over the border into India, and there is no international jurisdiction for traffickers. And so we can't force him to come back into the country. And as long as he stays outside of Nepal, there's nothing we can do. We as in anyone, because of the fact that those charges are based in that country. But I will mention an amazing example from our work of actually bringing that justice that is so crucial to fighting trafficking. There was a trafficker that we were able to intercept. This was also in Asia. This particular trafficker had trafficked her daughter, her sister, and her niece. And it was her sister that we were able to intercept and pull out of trafficking. And so she actually was the one that gave us tips to find her sister. And we found her, and we were able to prosecute her for 40 years in prison in Asia. So that is huge. And that's really one of our big success stories for fighting for justice.
And sadly, that shows you just kind of how close some of these ties can be in terms of like the family, and sadly how just gross in terms of what this impact can really be on the lives of others, and including your family. It's sad. Mm-hmm. Talk about how we can help your efforts. What can we do to help?
Well, I would say, first of all, there's a lot of ways to help. Some ways within Free for Life, people can host a fundraiser or an awareness event. We also offer free trainings on all the trainings, for example, Human Trafficking 101, a red flags training, our prevention approach that we offer locally to organizations or even individuals. Anyone can sign up for our newsletter to hear about the work that we're doing, learn from our webinars, but also really giving. I mean, especially in this time of COVID, it's so important to have that generosity. And we've really seen an increase in the demand of our services. And so it's really important that we're able to continue to exist and do the amazing work that we are doing.
Yeah, share a little bit of just how COVID obviously is impacting you, because when you look at it, there's a piece of this where when you lose some of the human connection, like you said, being able to be proactive, now they can maybe slide more in the shadows. So there's a huge increase of need there, but just what has COVID meant on your end?
Well, COVID has definitely shifted the way that we do our work. Kind of the first thing I want to say is that really we expect to see a rise in human trafficking on a global level in both labor and sex trafficking, because really kind of the push towards trafficking that traffickers use to lure people is their vulnerability. And now that more people are vulnerable and those that were already vulnerable have an increased vulnerability, we very much expect to see trafficking rise locally as well as globally. As far as things that we've noticed within the local spaces, for example, regarding trafficking, is that all of the referral agencies that would typically refer a victim to us, whether that be a minor or an adult, because they're not operating at full capacity, we've seen almost no calls from different agencies. But what we have seen that's very interesting is self-referrals. And what that means is a victim being brave enough hiding in a closet, trying to call the hotline, trying to call an anti-trafficking organization. I mean, they are desperate to get out of their trafficking situation. So we've seen a shift in that. We've also seen a lot of shifts, of course, online. So different ways that traffickers are actually soliciting sex, a lot more live sex, not the same type of approach. Traffickers adjust their business plan very similar to all of us with COVID. So it's really been something we're very concerned about, as we have seen, for example, more minors online, as well as more, for example, live sex shows. So people that are purchasing sex, as well as traffickers that are soliciting it, are just finding other approaches.
How has this work changed you personally?
That's a good question. I see the world differently. I can never see it the same. I could look back on the first time I ever went into the red light district and went into a brothel. And that was the moment I knew I would never be the same. It has absolutely broken my heart. And out of that brokenness has given me more motivation and fire to fight than I ever thought was possible.
Give us, as we wrap up, some words of encouragement based on that, in terms of the strength, the resiliency, but also, too, the fact that we as a community can come together and fight this.
I believe in that. I will never stop believing that if we can come together as a community, we can fight human trafficking. It is really my goal and vision that by the time my grandchildren are adults, that the world of trafficking will look very, very different. And that can only happen through everyone coming together to fight this. And I think the first step is awareness, but I also want to encourage everyone listening that no step is too small. And whether that means talking to someone about trafficking, bringing more awareness, of giving to an organization, volunteering with an organization, spreading reliable information. I mean, it takes awareness to really begin to change things in our communities as well as around the world. So don't give up just because it's dark. We have to fight the darkness.
Yeah, absolutely. Last question is the easiest one, is where do we go to get involved? So website, social media, where do we go?
So we are all over social media, Facebook and Instagram. It's Free for Life INTL for our Instagram handle. And then our website is freeforlifeintl.org. And we would love to see you guys visit us and stay connected.
Well, Gabrielle, thank you for all you and your team do. Greatly appreciate it. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you.